if God exists, why is there evil? And we're going to try and do it in 3 steps. First step is, does evil disprove God? Because you hear people saying there's too much evil in the world, so there can't be a good God. The second question we're going to try and answer is, if evil does not disprove God, what purpose is evil? Why does God leave it around? Why does he allow it to continue? What purpose could he have for allowing evil? And then the final question is, what's God's solution to evil? Now, I need to warn us all about one thing in here today, and that is, evil is not just a problem for the head, but it's also a problem for the heart. So if you're going through a lot of pain and suffering right now, what I might say this morning might not resonate with you. You don't need a philosopher, you need a pastor when you're going through difficulty, and unfortunately, Pastor Mike is on break right now. So I'm the philosopher. But I will say this, that if you're going through pain and suffering, the first step to recovery is for you to intellectually understand that God has a reason for the pain and suffering you're going through, even if you never find out this side of eternity what that reason or reasons are.
Well, I certainly agree with that. I think that God is on our side. God does love us. He's manifested it by creating us, by sustaining us, by giving us air to breathe, our heart beats within our bodies. He gives us food, every good thing in its season. He's manifested his love in innumerable ways to us. But what really comforts me is not simply that God loves me, but that the God that loves me has the power to fulfill the desires of that love. That he's not handcuffed by laws he's made. He's not tongue-tied by the creation that surrounds him. That God is in sovereign control over the world, and that he can bring about exactly what his love desires to be brought about. If I didn't have a kind of God who was both all-powerful and all-loving, there would be no reason to be assured from his love, because he might be so impotent that he couldn't accomplish any of his loving desires for me.
So what I'm going to try and do is give you some reasons why it might be happening. But the first question we're going to answer is, does evil disprove God? All right, so let's start here. Whenever you're talking about a big issue like this, I think you need to get the big picture. You need to go up to 30,000 feet and look around. And in order to do this, we're going to list evidence that God exists on the left and evidence he doesn't on the right. Do you know that everything physical changes, but the laws that govern everything that's physical don't change? At least they don't appear to. Why is that? Because the universe was put together by a mind, and it's sustained by a mind right now, an orderer. Also, objective morality, the idea that certain things are right and other things are wrong. Murder's wrong. Love is right. If there's no God, that's just your opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion. There's got to be a standard beyond us that grounds what true rightness or goodness is. And unless God exists, there's no such thing. Yet we know that goodness and truth exists and righteousness exists, so God must exist. Also, Old Testament prophecy and the resurrection and other miracles in the New Testament that I think you can show by historical investigation really happened. This is good evidence that God exists, and it's the Christian God.
I think that's a good question. As I see it, there are 2 answers to that, or 2 aspects of it to the Bible. 1, we're free, and God gave us freedom. And 2 is that this world is not the whole story. If we assume that this life is the whole story, then it seems unjust. But if we assume there's a life after this, and that God is not finished with us yet, that he's going to resurrect the dead, that there's going to be a day of reckoning, of reward and punishment, then of course it takes on an entirely different color. The Bible says that Jesus Christ brought life and immortality to light through the gospel. And what gives me hope as a believer is that Jesus reversed the course of death. He suffered for us, and he brought us hope of an immortal life.
What's the evidence that God doesn't exist? The biggest piece of evidence people say is evil. There's too much evil in the world, so there can't be a good God. Now, is evil an argument against God? Actually, no, evil is actually an argument for God. Why? Because objective evil presupposes objective good, and objective good requires God. You say, what do you mean? Because evil does not exist on its own. Evil only exists as a lack in a good thing. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? Doesn't exist, can't exist. Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you try and take all the car out of the rust? Doesn't exist. Evil can only exist as a parasite in a good thing. A totally moth-eaten garment is a hanger. It doesn't exist. So while evil is real, it can only exist in a good thing. And if it can only exist in a good thing, then goodness exists as the essential part of reality. And any deviation from goodness would be what we would call evil.
Whether you believe in God or you don't, at some point in our lives, all of us stop, look at the brokenness in the world, and wonder, God, where are you? I know you're good. You have the power to stop this, and yet you don't. Why do I suffer so much, and why is this world so broken? You know, some of the greatest thinkers of all time have wrestled with this question. So Albert Einstein, instantly enough, would say things like, God doesn't play dice with the universe. He saw a structure and order in the universe, but he couldn't believe in a personal God because of the evil and suffering in the world. People like Charles Darwin, who obviously wrote Origin of the Species. What a lot of people don't know is some of his biggest problems with God were not scientific, but the brokenness and suffering he saw in the world.
And here's what Lewis said about that in the book Mere Christianity, basically that evil requires good and good requires God. Here's how he put it. He said, and as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how would I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, there can't be a crooked line unless you know what a straight line is. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be immoral unless something is. Something can't be not right unless something is. And that presupposes God. Otherwise, everything's just a matter of opinion. So, evil does not disprove God. It may show there's a devil out there, but it can't disprove God. You could look at it this way as well. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil. But you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. If evil exists, and everybody knows it does, then God must exist. Because if there is no God, that means there is no good, which means there is no evil.
In fact, possibly the most influential atheist in the world today, Bart Ehrman, who's a former Christian. He went to Wheaton Bible College. He went to Moody Bible College. Now he's an atheist. He's a brilliant New Testament critic at the University of North Carolina, but here's what he wrote. He said, I left the faith for what I took to be, and still take to be, an unrelated reason: the problem of suffering in the world. Now, this isn't just a question that skeptics ask. It's a question many Christians and believers in God wrestle with. In fact, Habakkuk writes this. Habakkuk says, how long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you don't save?
And even Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist I quoted a minute ago, actually agrees that if there's no God, there's no right or wrong, there's no good or bad, there's no just or unjust. In fact, here's his famous quote on this. He says, if atheistic materialism is true, in other words, if we're just all moist robots, there is no spiritual realm, everything that happens just happens through the laws of physics. What about God's solution to evil? We know that evil does not disprove God. We know that God has a purpose for evil. What's God's ultimate solution? Before we get into this, I need to ask you a question, and here's the question. Does God promise to protect Christians from evil and suffering? No. But the question still remains, what's God's solution to evil? You know what God's solution to evil is? He suffered himself. He took evil upon himself. Do you know the entire Christian story is the answer to the problem of evil? That's what it is. And it's the only worldview that can answer it. that yes, evil exists, but God has entered the bloodstream of humanity to allow the people that tortured him to be reconciled to him, because he took their sin, our sin, on himself after living a perfect life. So the solution to evil is Jesus. He takes it upon himself, and his pain can be our gain. I say can be. Why? Because if you don't want to accept what he's done, you don't have to.